Coming up on At Issue.
I'm going to vote for life, whether that life be in the womb or that life begin after birth. I'm going to err on the side of life.
Abortion debate. Lawmakers take sides as two abortion bills are passed. One House, one Senate.
So we're not going to apologize for the war that's been unleashed. Because we didn't start it, but we will finish it.
And airport board protests. Board members, city leaders, and Hinds County legislators unite to say the fight over control of the Jackson Airport is far from over. At Issue starts right now. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the critical issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. And we want you to share your opinions and comments with us. Just go to facebook.com/MPB Online News. On Twitter, our handle is @MPB News. Also visit our webpage, mpbonline.org/issue. And you can check us out, MPB News, and all your favorite shows on our new MPB app. It's free to download for your Apple or Android device. A bill designed to protect government workers and others from punishment when exercising their religious beliefs appears to be headed to the governor's desk. Opponents say it's government-sponsored discrimination. LGBT activists rallied on the Capitol steps against House Bill 1523, the Protecting Freedom of Conscience from Government Discrimination Act. They say it would protect government officials who do not want to issue marriage licenses to gay couples based on religion. And some businesses would be protected if they refuse to serve some customers. But supporters of the bill say it's aimed at protecting Christians who exercise their faith. Both the House and Senate approved the measure. We spoke with one of the bill's authors, Representative Andy Gibson, and Human Rights Campaign State Director Rob Hill.
What this law does is it allows people to use their religious belief to discriminate against another person. The First Amendment is about protecting us. It's not about using it to hurt or disenfranchise or deny basic civil rights to individuals.
This is an anti-discrimination bill, and for whatever reason, folks are trying to say it's a discriminatory bill. That's exactly false. People of faith are Americans too, and they too are entitled to the protections against discrimination for their faith.
Governor Bryant says he has not gotten the bill yet, but he will examine the bill as he does with all bills that cross his desk. A similar bill was approved by the legislature of the state of Georgia, but it was vetoed by the governor there. The fight over the state flag is picking up again. Senator John Horhn says he is asking for a suspension of the rules so a bill to change the state flag can be reintroduced. The bill calls for establishing a commission to redesign the flag without the Confederate emblem. All bills to change the flag in the House and Senate died earlier in the session. Horhn was critical of some of the legislation that has passed during this session.
If you look at the legislation that we've pushed forward, a lot of it is divisive, it's small-minded thinking, and it's going to create problems for the state, not only in terms of our image, but also in terms of our economy, how we are perceived in the world of athletics, how we're perceived in the world of Christianity. And we say that we're a Christian state, but sometimes our actions say otherwise.
Horhn is calling on major corporations like Toyota, Nissan, and Ingalls to come out against the state flag. He says a new flag would represent the entire state and not just some of the people. Both the House and Senate have passed abortion bills. House Bill 519 calls for banning second trimester abortions. It passed the Senate 40-6. Senate Bill 2238 calls for prohibiting the State Division of Medicaid from reimbursing facilities that perform abortions. It passed the House 77-37. The bill was originally aimed at Planned Parenthood. Debate in the House over the bill got heated.
Calendar year 2010 through calendar year 2015, the Division of Medicaid has spent $544. $544.03 on Planned Parenthood. Bah humbug on you.
I'm going to vote for life, whether that life be in the womb or that life begin after birth. I'm going to err on the side of life. Now, yes, that's right. $500 is an insignificant amount. It's kind of like pocket change. And in some areas of this world, pocket change is more valuable than human life. I pray that today we say no in Mississippi.
Well, here's what some of you are saying on Facebook. Jennifer Sanders says, let's keep passing these asinine laws to further take away women's rights. We have lead in the water of our capital city. Our bridges and roads are crumbling, and this is what we get. It's infuriating. Tom Card says, I'm not saying there should be laws that would outlaw all abortions. I'm sure there would be some situations that an abortion would be appropriate. But I am against having an abortion out of convenience. To me, that's murder. Board members at the Jackson Medgar Wiley Evers International Airport say they oppose Senate Bill 2162, which calls for changing the makeup of the board to have more state and regional influence. They, leaders from the city of Jackson and Hinds County, state lawmakers from Hinds County, and the NAACP gathered at the Capitol to express their opposition to the effort to expand the board to include regional representation from Rankin, Hinds, and Madison counties. It would be a 9-member board with 5 members coming from the city of Jackson. Current board members say they were never contacted by the governor or the sponsor of the bill, Senator Josh Harkins of Rankin County, to discuss the issue. They call the move a power grab by people with personal interests, and they pledged to fight it.
The bottom line is they figure they can just take it. It would be akin to me coming to your house and saying that I'm going to let you live in this house, but I'm going to run your house from now on. You can keep the title in your name, but I make all decisions about your yards, I make all decisions about your furniture, I make all decisions about your DirecTV or Comcast or whatever. You get no more say-so in your own. In other words, that is taking ownership away from me. So don't believe the lie when they say it's not about ownership.
And we do not have dialogue with this bill. We have nothing more than a power grab, and we are going to do all we can to oppose it.
We didn't start this fight, but we will finish it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
They drew first blood, and we're going to have to end it. So we're not going to apologize for the war that's been unleashed. That's right. Because we didn't start it, but we will finish it.
The bill has passed the Senate, and it was amended in the House, so it now goes back to the Senate. Many opposed to restructuring the Jackson Airport Board cite what happened with the attempted state takeover of the airport in Charlotte, North Carolina a few years ago. Joining us now is Eli Portillo. He's a business reporter for the Charlotte Observer newspaper and a graduate of Harvard University, and he has written extensively about the subject. Eli, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the situation there. Could you sort of summarize the situation in North Carolina from its genesis to where we are with it today?
Well, in 2013, the state legislature, which is heavily dominated by Republicans in North Carolina, decided to pass a law that would take control of the airport in Charlotte from City Council and give it to a new regional board that would be more dominated by Republicans. The City Council is dominated by Democrats. The bill passed over the strenuous objections of City Council in Charlotte and the Democrats in the state legislature, but then everything kind of bogged down in the legal system. The city sued to block the bill. It went to federal court, and eventually the FAA decided that they weren't going to grant the certificate that the new airport commission would need to run the airport. So things are still kind of in limbo. The airport commission exists but doesn't have the authority to run the airport, and City Council is still in control.
And this legal fight you mentioned, how much has that cost each side?
Well, the legal bills ended up running to more than $1 million, split about evenly between the Airport Commission and City Council. One interesting wrinkle is that the Airport Commission, even though it was created, never had access to any funds. So they got about $500,000 of outstanding legal bills and no access to money to pay them.
What was it that led to the legislatures, or those in the legislature who supported it? What led to that effort to take control of the airport from the city of Charlotte?
Well, that depends who you ask. The Republican-led legislature said that Charlotte's airport is a very important economic asset, probably the most important in the state, and they were concerned that City Council might make reckless spending decisions that would lead the airport into financial trouble. they didn't really have very strong examples of that, and that led the city council to charge that the state legislature was just making a power grab and trying to take one of the city's most important assets and take control of it and put it in a Republican-dominated board's oversight.
What do the people think about this, the voters? Do they feel the same way? Is it split among party lines?
Well, there's definitely a lot of support in Charlotte for keeping the airport under city council control. The city is very proud of its airport. It's the 7th busiest in the country, and even the Republicans on Charlotte City Council said that the airport should be under city control. At the state level, I think it's more split along party lines.
So what's next? If it's bogged down and sort of in this limbo situation right now, any insight on how it gets out of that and where it goes from here?
Well, it's a very tangled situation right now. In theory, the FAA could make a ruling that the airport should be run by the new oversight board that the state created. And even though this board hasn't really done anything in 3 years, they would then be in control. In theory, that also might never happen, and the city could just remain in de facto control like they are now for the foreseeable future. So it's really kind of unclear what the way out of it is. I will say that there hasn't really been any movement either by the state legislature or anyone else involved with the airport board to force the issue and try to force the FAA or a federal court to make a ruling.
Where's the problem? Is it the language of the legislation as far as not being able to move from this point? Is there something that the legislature could have done differently to move forward in the direction they wanted to go?
Well, to operate a commercial airport, you need a certificate from the FAA. And the FAA is actually run by it's actually run by the Transportation Department. And the Secretary of Transportation right now is Anthony Foxx. He was Charlotte's mayor, a Democrat, when this whole thing started, and he opposes the takeover of Charlotte's airport. So it's sort of a Kafkaesque situation where the governing body that could say the airport, who should run the airport, is actually run by a former Charlotte mayor who opposes the state takeover of the airport. So like I said, it's very tangled.
I was going to say another interesting wrinkle, a similar situation to what we have in some ways, others not, but some interesting insight on something we have become familiar with down here in Mississippi. Eli Portillo with the Charlotte Observer talking about the situation there with the airport and the effort to take state control of the airport in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Good luck.
Education is always a big issue during the legislative session. Appointing superintendents, the MAEP funding formula, and charter schools, just a few of the items on the agenda this year. We brought to the table two education advocates who sometimes agree, sometimes disagree on what bills should become law to help students, parents, and school districts. Nancy Loom is the executive director of the Parents Campaign. It's a nonprofit group working to improve public education. She is from Clinton and is a graduate of Delta State. Grant Callen is the founder and president of Empower Mississippi, an education advocacy group that works to get people involved in the public policy process. He's a native of Laurel and is a graduate of Belhaven University. We thank you both for joining us on At Issue to talk about an important issue for many Mississippians, of course, that being education. Let's start with charter schools. Nancy, this concept is still fairly new in Mississippi. What's your organization's take on charter schools and where we are right now with policy regarding them?
We think charter schools are an important tool to have for extreme situations where children in a given community might have a school district that for a number of reasons simply is not getting the job done and is chronically underperforming for a number of years. In that case, we think that it is a good idea to provide a charter school if that charter school can meet some pretty rigorous expectations as far as the quality of education being provided those children. What we don't want to see is a situation where you have a strong public education system that's doing a great job for the children and to have resources siphoned away from that for another school that diminishes the quality of education for all children.
Now, Grant, you support more wide expansion of charter schools in Mississippi?
We do, and we're very enthusiastic about the charter school movement in Mississippi, and we're thrilled to see the 2 charter schools that have started in Jackson, serving 2 of the poorest zip codes in the state, doing a great job. We think charters are an asset to the public school community. They are public schools. They simply serve students in different ways. They are freed to be more innovative, but they're also held accountable for academic results in a way that traditional public schools aren't. And we're thrilled to see the legislation that has moved through this session that would expand charter schools to more communities and allow them to be created, particularly in the Delta, where their children need another educational option.
Let's talk about vouchers now. The legislature passed legislation last year that would enable special needs students to go elsewhere outside the public school system to seek more enriched education, as it were. There was a lofty effort at the beginning of the session to expand that program even more.
Well, look, we were involved early on working with legislators to help craft the legislation that was passed last year to serve students with special needs. And we feel like it is a tall task to ask any one institution or certainly one school to meet the needs of every student. Every student's different. And so vouchers, and in Mississippi, as they're called, education scholarship accounts, give parents who have students in the public school system and they're not being well served. Education scholarship accounts give parents the ability to shop around and find a better setting for their child. And so we were supportive of that legislation last year, and we're supportive of legislation this year that would have helped expand those programs.
But Nancy, you not so much?
Not so much. The goal of voucher legislation is to convert a portion of the public education system into a taxpayer-funded private school system. And we think that's inappropriate. Our tax dollars are to be used for public good, something that benefits all of us. And to move resources away from public schools to benefit the private agenda or a parent who, for whatever reason, wants to send his or her parent to a private school and have someone else pay for it, that actually harms the public in general, doesn't do anything to further the public good. So we think that's an inappropriate use of taxpayer dollars.
What's going to happen with MAEP? It seems like there is a lot of debate about this public school funding formula each year in the legislature. Not so much this year, at least not that we're aware of or that's out in public. What's going to happen with that, and what does your organization want to happen with that funding formula?
Well, let me say that there is a bill in play now that would change a portion of the funding formula to make sure that every student in our schools is funded by funding enrollment rather than just based upon attendance, and we think that's a good move. Now, we are concerned about the conversation currently underway about possibly making broad changes to the formula in conference, which means that those, as you said, Wilson, those changes would not be made in the public eye, in the public view, but rather in secret, behind closed doors. This is far too important an issue to be handled in that way. If the legislature wants to make changes to the current funding formula, which, by the way, is broadly supported among voters. People overwhelmingly support the current funding formula. If the legislature wants to make changes to that, it needs to be fully vetted. It needs to be done in the light of day and debated in committee and taken through the full process, not done in secret behind closed doors in a conference committee.
Greg, do you agree with that?
Well, I think education and I think funding of education is one piece of the equation, but it's certainly not the most important piece of the equation. Making sure that the money that is appropriated actually is helping students, making sure it actually gets to the classroom, making sure teachers have the resources they need to stand in front of students every day and educate them, and then at the end of the day, making sure that students have a quality education is most important. And so I think all of this debate simply about funding education, look, we've funded education as a state at historic levels the last couple of years, and there hasn't been, we haven't seen the results correlated with that funding. One of the reasons we support school choice is because one public school cannot meet the needs of every child. And so simply putting more money into a system that may or may not meet the needs of that child is not the ultimate answer. We need to make sure that money is getting to students, and school choice is the best way to do that.
Nancy Loom of the Parents Campaign, thank you. Grant Callen of Empower Mississippi, we thank you both for being with us on At Issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get straight to the point now with views from both sides of the political aisle. Austin Barber is a Republican national strategist. He's the founding partner of Clearwater Group. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He's an attorney with the Beria Jones Law Firm and a former member of the House. Good to have both of you with us again.
Thank you.
At issue.
Good to be here.
Let's talk about something that a lot of people have been talking about, this Religious Freedoms Bill. We mentioned it earlier in the program. Something happened in the legislature on Friday where it appeared it was going to the governor's office, to his desk, Brandon, but there's something else that happened in the process so it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, that's right. Representative Jay Hughes held it on a motion to reconsider. This is an option that's available to any member. They can at any point after a bill has been passed or not ask for a motion to reconsider. That holds the bill, it stays on the calendar, and then they'll come back and deal with that either by moving to table it, which would dismiss that motion to reconsider and it would move on.
To the governor's desk.
That's right. Or if it were successful and there was still time on the calendar, then they could theoretically do something else with it.
So not done yet.
That's right.
But likely. All right, Austin, give us from your standpoint, the general consensus among supporters of this bill. Why do they support it, and what's the argument for it?
Well, when I've talked to Republicans in leadership in both the House and the Senate, I think this is how they view this, and this is how I view it too. Okay, this is my personal opinion. A lot of times I try to separate those, but I agree with some. Listen, first of all, you have to look at the facts. Obviously, last year the U.S. Supreme Court spoke on the issue of marriage. They legalized gay marriage in 2015. I don't agree with that. Okay, and there are a lot of Republicans that don't agree with that, and there's some Democrats that don't agree, but it is the law. It's the law of the land. But what we see now in many states, I think Jeff Pender reported there are 10 states in the Clarion Ledger that have either passed similar types of law or who are looking at it, is a move to protect the religious rights of those who disagree with gay marriage. I want to sort of define who those people are. We don't have a lot of time to talk about this. Those are pastors who don't believe it, who don't want to be forced to do a gay marriage. Those are small business owners, florists, bakeries, those types of people who would be involved in marriages or weddings, And of course, those are county officials or those who may work for a circuit clerk who say, it's against my religion. I don't want to have to issue a certificate to someone who's going to have a gay marriage. Now, what this law does protect is those who are gay, who want to go to a circuit clerk office to get a marriage license. They have to have someone in office who will do that. So that's sort of the 40,000-foot perspective from Republicans who, like me, believe this is a bill that's worthy.
You know, I think it's regrettable that we're passing it. I think that this idea that discrimination is somehow valued is a really sad thing. Discrimination is not an important part of being a patriot. It's not an important part of any religion worth having. And so the idea that we empower people to refuse people based on their sexual orientation, I think, is just really a sad day for our state. I will applaud Republicans who have had the courage to speak out of this, like Governor Nathan Deal of Georgia, who decided that this was a bad move for the state of Georgia, and Republicans in the House in Mississippi who voted against it, like Toby Barker, like Scott Delano, and others. I think that did take considerable courage. But listen, there's a larger issue working its way through the Mississippi legislature, and I think we heard some of that in the news stories today. We have made every social bill layup that can be made. We've hit abortion again for, I think, the 7th session in a row. We've now hit the gay issue again for what seems like the 7th session in a row. And now we've taken on the city of Jackson. But now it's time to get down to the big boy meat and potatoes part of running this state. Our roads and bridges need serious help. Our economy doesn't have a budget at this moment, and the Republicans don't have a plan. We just heard great debate about education and what bills are going to be passed or not passed. We haven't heard that kind of thing. We don't know what the proposals are, and that's a big problem. And so whether you like these bills or not, I don't. That's clear. Austin, I know you like some, not others. But the idea that they're taking out all the air of the Capitol. Why are we still talking about this stuff?
No, I understand. And listen, social issues are always tough issues for people of the same party or the same family or different parties or different families to have to talk about. But this is the process. I agree with you. I'd rather be talking about roads and bridges, infrastructure, taxes, education. Because look, under this Republican leadership in both the House and the Senate and Governor Bryant, record funding on education. I don't mean to point at you, but it is record funding, and that's something to be proud of. But I have to say this very quickly about this particular issue. I do think today that it is amazing and sometimes, frankly, a shame that people who don't believe in gay marriage, like myself, are somehow have to be described as you want to discriminate against people or you're a bigot for believing that. Whoa, wait a minute. Hold on a second here. That's just not right. Have we moved that fast in our society and in our country from what the Supreme Court said 1 year ago? And never in 200 plus years of our country has this been allowed. But now that it has, and less than a year later, I'm somehow a bigot or I want to discriminate against people.
It's a helpful
hold
point.
on for just a
and
second.
And I have
now.
to sometimes remind. I mean, it's easy to get impassioned about these things, and I fall into the name calling problem too. And social media is a horrible outlet because it's so easy to get your shackles up. Truth of the matter is, you're right. It's not a fair thing to do the name calling. But Mr. Gibson is absolutely wrong when he says this isn't about discrimination. Think about it this way. If I come to your shop to buy flowers, that should be a simple exchange over flowers.
Yeah.
The idea that it somehow makes you more patriotic or more Christian to fail to serve me because you have a suspicion about my personal life, that's not American.
Yeah, and if I had that flower shop, I'd sell it to whoever because, I'm a capitalist and I'm trying to make as much money as I possibly can. But there are some of those people who don't want to do it. And I think the purpose of this bill is just to protect them from some kind of civil or criminal, you're the lawyer here, type of persecution in the future.
One quick thing before we move. Nissan, Toyota, MGM, Tyson Foods, they all have issued statements against this bill.
We need to leave it there. We'll find out what happens next week and what the governor might do with the bill. Join us again next week on At Issue.